The December wind cut through the naval training facility like a blade as Sarah Martinez stepped out of the transport vehicle. At 23, she stood barely 5 feet 2 inches tall, her petite frame dwarfed by the towering concrete buildings that housed some of the world's most elite warriors. The Navy SEALs training compound in Coronado had seen many visitors over the years, but none quite like Sarah. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a regulation ponytail, and her oversized military fatigue seemed to swallow her small figure whole. As she walked toward the main building, carrying a worn leather gun case that looked almost comically large in her delicate hands, whispers followed in her wake like shadows.
"Look at that little doll," muttered Petty Officer Jake Morrison, a 6'3" mountain of muscle whose biceps were bigger than Sarah's entire torso.
He nudged his buddy with an elbow, pointing discreetly at the approaching figure.
"What's Barbie doing in our house?"
The comment drew snickers from the group of SEALs gathered near the entrance. These were men who had survived Hell Week, who had been forged in the crucible of the world's most demanding military training. They were warriors who had faced enemy fire in Afghanistan, Iraq, and countless classified operations around the globe. To them, this tiny woman looked like she had wandered in from a children's toy store. Sarah heard every word. She had been hearing variations of the same comments her entire life. Growing up in rural Montana, she had been the smallest kid in her class, the one who looked like a gentle breeze might knock her over. Her father, a Vietnam veteran turned rancher, had taught her to shoot when she was 8 years old, partly out of necessity and partly because he believed every person should know how to defend themselves. "Ignore them, sweetheart," her father had told her years ago when bullies at school called her names.
"Let your actions speak louder than their words ever could." Now, walking through this testosterone-filled environment, those words echoed in her mind like a protective charm.
She kept her eyes forward, her spine straight, even as more comments drifted her way. "Hey, tiny dancer," called out another SEAL, his voice dripping with mock concern.
"You sure you're in the right place? The daycare center is about 10 miles down the road."
The laughter that followed was harsh and grating. Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she continued walking without acknowledgement. She had not traveled 1,500 miles and endured 3 days of bureaucratic red tape to be deterred by juvenile taunts. Commander Robert Hayes emerged from the main building, his weathered face bearing the stern expression of a man who had seen too many wars and buried too many good soldiers. At 52, he was a legend in SEAL community, a man whose reputation for excellence was matched only by his reputation for being absolutely ruthless when it came to maintaining standards. "Martinez," he called out, his voice cutting through the chatter like a knife through silk.
The laughter died instantly as 49 of the Navy's finest snapped to attention. Hayes commanded that kind of respect without even trying.
Sarah approached and snapped off a crisp salute.
"Reporting as ordered, Commander."
Hayes returned the salute, his cold blue eyes studying her with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. Behind him, Sarah could see the faces of the SEALs, most wearing expressions that ranged from barely concealed amusement to outright skepticism. "You're the Marine Corps champion I've been hearing about," Hayes said, his tone neutral but carrying undertones that suggested he was not particularly impressed by what he saw.
"Yes, sir. The one who supposedly shot expert marksman scores in every category." "Yes, sir."
Hayes stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear.
"Look around you, Martinez. See those men behind me?
Each one of them has earned the right to wear the trident through blood, sweat, and sacrifice that would break most people. They've proven themselves in combat zones where missing a shot means your buddy goes home in a box."
Sarah's green eyes never wavered from his. "I understand, sir." "Do you?"
Hayes stepped back, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "Because what I see is a little girl playing dress-up in daddy's uniform." The words hit like a slap, and Sarah felt her cheeks flush red. But she had endured worse. Much worse. This was just another test, another hurdle to overcome. "With respect, Commander," she said, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest, "I didn't come here to play anything." Hayes smiled, but it was the cold smile of a shark. "We'll see about that. Gentlemen," he called out to his men, "Christmas Eve is in 3 days. I was planning to give you all some downtime, but it seems we have a special guest who wants to play with the big boys." He turned back to Sarah, his expression hardening. "Here's how this is going to work, Martinez.
Christmas Eve morning, we're going to set up a little shooting competition. You versus my boys. All of them. If you can outshoot even one of these warriors, I'll personally write a letter of recommendation to whoever sent you here. But, when you fail, and you will fail, you'll pack your little gun case and go back to whatever military daycare center you came from. Deal?" The SEALs behind him were grinning now, some actually rubbing their hands together in anticipation. This was going to be better than Christmas morning. Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her. 49 of the most elite soldiers in the world, each one convinced that she was about to provide them with 3 days of entertainment before her inevitable humiliation and departure. "Deal," she said simply. As she was escorted to temporary quarters, the comments followed her like a pack of hungry wolves. 3 days until Christmas, boys," laughed Petty Officer Morrison. "Santa's bringing us an early present this year."
"Poor little thing," added another voice.
"I almost feel bad about what's going to happen to her."
"Almost," agreed a third voice, triggering another round of laughter. But, if they had looked more closely at Sarah Martinez as she disappeared into the building, they might have noticed something that would have given them pause. Her hands, small and delicate as they appeared, showed calluses in very specific places. Her eyes, green and bright as a mountain meadow, held a steely determination that spoke of countless hours spent perfecting her craft. Most importantly, they might have noticed that despite being outnumbered 49-1, despite being mocked and ridiculed and dismissed, she walked with the quiet confidence of someone who had never met a target she couldn't hit. The next 3 days would prove to be very educational for everyone involved. Sarah Martinez had not come to Coronado to be liked or accepted. She had come to prove a point that had been building inside her for 15 years, ever since the first time someone had called her a doll and assumed she was too fragile for the real world.
Christmas Eve couldn't come soon enough.
The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp California sunshine that made the Pacific Ocean sparkle like scattered diamonds. Sarah had been awake since 0400 hours, not because she was nervous, but because her internal clock had been set to early rising since childhood. While the SEALs were still sleeping off their evening of jokes and predictions about her upcoming failure, she was already in the base gymnasium, working through a routine that would have impressed even these elite warriors. Her workout was precise and methodical. She began with yoga, moving through poses that emphasized balance and breathing control. Her small frame moved with the fluid grace of a dancer, but there was nothing delicate about the way she held each position. This was functional fitness, designed specifically to enhance the steady hands and controlled breathing that made the difference between hitting a target and missing it by millimeters. After yoga came weight training, but not the hulking, muscle-building routine that most people expected. Instead, Sarah focused on exercises that strengthened her core and improved her stability. Light weights, high repetitions, movements that built the kind of endurance that allowed a sniper to hold position for hours without fatigue affecting accuracy. She finished with meditation, sitting cross-legged on a mat in perfect silence for 20 minutes. This was perhaps the most important part of her routine, the mental preparation that allowed her to shut out distractions and focus entirely on the task at hand. In this quiet space, she visualized every aspect of the upcoming challenge, seeing herself succeeding where everyone expected her to fail. By 0630 hours, she was showered, dressed, and heading to the mess hall for breakfast. The dining area buzzed with conversation as SEALs discussed their plans for the next 2 days. Christmas Eve was traditionally a time for relaxation before the holiday break, but this year's entertainment had everyone excited. Sarah loaded her tray with the disciplined eating habits of a professional athlete. Oatmeal with fresh fruit, whole grain toast, black coffee. Nothing that would affect her blood sugar or energy levels. She found an empty table in the corner and began eating in silence, aware that she was being watched and discussed by nearly every person in the room. "Look at her eating her little rabbit food," commented Staff Sergeant Carlos Rivera, loud enough to carry across the room. Probably worried about fitting into her dress for the Christmas party. The comment drew the expected laughter, but Sarah noticed something else in the room. Not everyone was laughing. A few of the older SEALs, the veterans with 20 or more years of service, were watching her with different expressions.
There was still skepticism, certainly, but also a kind of professional curiosity. Chief Petty Officer Michael Thompson, a grizzled warrior with silver hair and scars that told stories of battles in distant lands, approached her table. At 47, he had seen enough combat to know that appearances could be deceiving, and something about this young woman intrigued him. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his tone respectful rather than mocking. Sarah gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Please." Thompson settled his large frame into the chair, studying her with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "You know," he said quietly, "I've been doing this job for 26 years. Seen a lot of people come and go. Most of them, you can tell within the first 5 minutes whether they belong or not." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "And what do you think about me? Honestly? You're a mystery. You don't act like someone who's in over their head. Hell, you don't even act nervous. That's either supreme confidence or complete delusion." Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving at the base. "I guess we'll find out which one it is." Thompson leaned back, a slight grin playing at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, I guess we will. For what it's worth, Martinez, I'm rooting for you. These young bucks could use a lesson in humility." After breakfast, Sarah spent time in the base library, researching the layout of the shooting range and the typical weather conditions for this time of year. She studied wind patterns, temperature variations, and humidity levels that might affect bullet trajectory. This was the kind of meticulous preparation that separated good shooters from great ones. Meanwhile, the SEALs were making their own preparations, but theirs involved more boasting than actual practice. Groups gathered throughout the base, discussing strategy and making predictions about how quickly they would dispatch this pretender to their throne. "I say she doesn't make it past the first round," declared Petty Officer First Class David Kim, cleaning his rifle with the casual confidence of someone who had never doubted his abilities. "One look at a real target and she'll probably start crying." "Nah," disagreed Seaman Jack Foster, barely 21 and the newest member of the team. "She'll last maybe 2 rounds before she realizes she's embarrassing herself. Then, she'll make some excuse about not feeling well." The betting pools started around lunchtime. Most of the money was on Sarah washing out in spectacular fashion, with odds heavily favoring her failing to hit even basic qualifying scores. Only a few of the veterans, led by Chief Thompson, placed small bets on the possibility that she might surprise everyone. As the day progressed, word of the upcoming competition spread beyond the SEAL community. Marines stationed at nearby Camp Pendleton heard about it through the military grapevine. Air Force personnel at local bases started making plans to drive over and witness what was being billed as the entertainment event of the year. "You hear about this little girl who thinks she can outshoot SEALs?" asked Marine Gunnery Sergeant Patricia Williams, herself an expert marksman with numerous shooting awards. "I almost want to drive over just to see the looks on everyone's faces when reality hits." But, even as the mockery continued and the betting pools grew larger, a few people were beginning to have second thoughts. Commander Hayes spent the afternoon reviewing Sarah's personnel file, and what he found there gave him pause. Her shooting scores weren't just good, they were exceptional. More than exceptional, they were approaching the level of legendary. Her record showed she had won the Marine Corps Championship 3 years running, each time by margins that were considered statistically impossible. She had set new records in long-distance precision shooting, combat accuracy under stress, and moving target engagement. The file contained commendations from instructors who described her as the most naturally gifted marksman they had ever encountered. Still, Hayes reminded himself, paper achievements were one thing. Performing under pressure, especially with 49 elite warriors watching your every move, was something entirely different. He had seen plenty of hot shots crumble when the stakes were real and the audience was hostile. That evening, Sarah called her father from the base phone, their first conversation since she had arrived in California. Thomas Martinez's weathered voice carried the warmth of genuine concern mixed with the pride of a man who had raised his daughter to be strong. "How are they treating you out there, sweetheart?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. "About like we expected," Sarah replied, keeping her voice neutral. "They think I'm some kind of joke." "And how does that make you feel?"
Sarah was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the Pacific sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink.
Honestly, Dad?
It makes me want to show them exactly what this joke can do. Thomas chuckled, the sound carrying 15 years of shared memories.
That's my girl. You remember what I taught you about pressure? Pressure is just another word for opportunity to prove what you're made of. That's right. And what are you made of?
Steel and determination, Sarah answered without hesitation, reciting the phrase that had become their family motto. Then, show them, sweetheart.
Show them what a Martinez can do when the world says it can't be done.
After the call, Sarah returned to her quarters and began the final phase of her preparation. She disassembled and cleaned her rifle with the ritualistic precision of a master craftsman. Every component was inspected, every surface polished to perfection. This weapon was more than just a tool, it was an extension of herself, crafted and customized over years of competition and practice. Outside her window, she could hear the SEALs gathering for their traditional Christmas Eve celebration. Laughter and music drifted across the base as these warriors enjoyed what they expected to be their last night before providing themselves with the best Christmas entertainment they had ever experienced. But, as Sarah loaded her magazines with hand-selected ammunition, each round chosen for its precise specifications and tested for consistency, she allowed herself a small smile.
Tomorrow would indeed be memorable for everyone involved. She just didn't think it would be memorable for the reasons they expected.
Christmas Eve morning dawned cold and clear, with the kind of perfect visibility that made experienced shooters grateful and nervous competitors terrified. By 0800 hours, word had spread far beyond the SEAL compound, and spectators were arriving from military installations across Southern California. What had started as a simple base entertainment had evolved into something approaching a military legend in the making. The shooting range had been transformed overnight. Targets were set at distances ranging from 100 to 800 meters, covering every conceivable scenario from close-quarters engagement to long-distance precision work. Wind flags dotted the course, and electronic scoring systems had been installed to ensure absolute accuracy in measurement. Sarah arrived at the range 30 minutes early, carrying her rifle case with the same calm confidence she had displayed since her arrival. She wore regulation military fatigues that had been tailored to fit her small frame properly, and her blonde hair was braided back in a tight military style that wouldn't interfere with her shooting. The SEALs were already there, of course, having arrived even earlier to claim the best spectator positions and continue their 3-day festival of jokes at her expense. But something had changed in the atmosphere overnight. The jeering was still there, but it was mixed now with genuine curiosity and, in some cases, the first hints of nervousness. "Morning, Barbie," called out Petty Officer Morrison, though his voice lacked some of the confidence it had carried 3 days earlier.
"Ready to play with the real toys?"
Sarah didn't respond verbally, but she began unpacking her rifle with movements so fluid and professional that even the most skeptical observers found themselves paying closer attention.
This wasn't some weekend warrior fumbling with equipment.
Every action spoke of thousands of hours of practice and absolute familiarity with her weapon. Commander Hayes approached the firing line, clipboard in hand and expression stern. "All right, people, listen up," he barked, his voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. "This is how today's competition will work. We start with standard qualification courses and progress to advanced scenarios.
Martinez shoots first in each round, followed by my SEALs in order of seniority."
He turned to Sarah, his cold blue eyes showing no hint of the doubts that had kept him awake the previous night. "You understand the stakes, Martinez. This isn't about participation trophies or moral victories. You either prove you belong with these warriors or you prove that you don't." "Understood, Commander," Sarah replied, her voice steady as granite. The first course was basic rifle qualification at 100 meters, the kind of shooting that every military marksman was expected to master. Sarah approached the firing line with her rifle held in the ready position, checking her sight alignment one final time before settling into position. The watching crowd fell silent as she assumed her shooting stance. Even the skeptics found themselves holding their breath as this tiny woman prepared to pit her skills against men who had been shooting since childhood and had refined their abilities in the crucible of combat. Sarah controlled her breathing, feeling her heart rate slow to its normal resting pace. The target downrange seemed to grow larger in her scope as she entered the zone that every great marksman knows, the place where the world narrows to nothing but shooter, rifle, and target. The first shot rang out across the range, the sharp crack of the rifle followed by absolute silence. Downrange, the electronic scoring system immediately displayed the result: dead center bullseye, perfect 10. A murmur ran through the crowd, but Sarah was already preparing her second shot. Again, the rifle cracked, and again the scoring system showed a perfect 10. By the time she had fired her 10th and final round of the qualification course, she had achieved something that even these elite warriors rarely accomplished: a perfect score of 100 out of 100. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the most confident SEALs found themselves exchanging uncertain glances as the reality of what they had just witnessed began to sink in. "Lucky streak," muttered Petty Officer Morrison, though his voice lacked conviction. Chief Petty Officer Thompson stepped to the firing line next, representing 26 years of military shooting experience. He was followed by the rest of the SEALs in order, each one determined to prove that Sarah's performance was a fluke. Thompson scored 97 out of 100, an excellent performance by any standard. The next SEAL scored 95. As the competition progressed through the entire team, scores ranged from 91 to 98. All excellent. All respectable. None perfect. When the last SEAL had finished firing, the electronic scoring board told a story that no one had expected. Sarah Martinez had outshot every single member of America's most elite military unit. But the competition was far from over. The second course moved to 200 meters with moving targets, simulating combat conditions where enemies didn't stand still and wait to be shot. This was the kind of shooting that separated trained soldiers from true marksmen. Sarah approached the line again, and this time even the jokers in the crowd were paying serious attention. The betting pools that had seemed so certain 3 days earlier were suddenly looking like very bad investments. The moving targets began their program sequences, weaving and bobbing in patterns designed to challenge even expert marksmen. Sarah tracked the first target smoothly, leading it precisely before squeezing the trigger. Hit. The second target required a more complex calculation as it moved laterally across her field of view. Hit. By the time she had engaged all 10 moving targets, she had achieved 9 hits and 1 near miss that the electronic system scored as a 9. 99 points out of 100 possible. The SEALs followed, and once again their performance was excellent by normal standards. Scores ranged from 82 to 93 points. Respectable numbers that would have been impressive if not for the tiny woman who had just made them look ordinary. The third course pushed the distance out to 400 meters, testing long-range precision in conditions that included crosswinds and varying light conditions as clouds moved across the California sky. This was the kind of shooting that required not just skill, but an almost supernatural ability to read environmental conditions and compensate for factors that could affect bullet trajectory. Sarah studied the wind flags for a full minute before settling into position. This distance required a different kind of focus, a calculation of multiple variables that had to be processed in seconds and applied with absolute precision. Her first shot took longer than the previous courses as she waited for the wind to settle into a pattern she could predict. When she fired, the bullet traveled for what seemed like an eternity before striking the target dead center. By the end of the 400-meter course, Sarah had scored 97 points out of 100, missing perfect only because of 2 shots that landed in the 9 ring instead of the 10. The SEAL scores on this course showed the true difficulty of long-range precision shooting. Even these elite warriors struggled with the distance and conditions, with scores ranging from 68 to 87 points. But Commander Hayes wasn't finished. He had one more test in mind, something that would push both equipment and skill to their absolute limits. 800 meters, he announced, his voice carrying across the now silent range. Long-distance precision. 1 shot. Winner takes all. 800 meters was nearly half a mile, a distance where the slightest error in calculation or execution would result in a complete miss. At this range, bullets were affected by everything from humidity to temperature to the rotation of the Earth itself. The target seemed impossibly small through the scope, a tiny circle of paper that represented the difference between vindication and humiliation for Sarah Martinez. She spent 5 full minutes studying the conditions, watching the wind flags at various points along the range, calculating the precise adjustments needed for distance, wind drift, and atmospheric pressure. The crowd had grown to over 200 spectators, but their presence faded to nothing as Sarah entered the deepest level of focus she had ever achieved. When she finally squeezed the trigger, the rifle's crack seemed to echo across the entire base.
Downrange, nearly half a mile away, the electronic system took several seconds to register the impact.
Perfect bullseye. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Chief Petty Officer Thompson starting to clap, slowly and deliberately. One by one, the other SEALs joined in until the entire crowd was giving Sarah Martinez the kind of standing ovation that warriors reserve for their most respected comrades.
49 SEALs took their turns at the 800-meter target. 3 of them managed to hit the target.
None came closer than the 7 ring.
When the final scores were tallied, the result was undeniable and unprecedented.
Sarah Martinez, the tiny woman they had mockingly called a doll, had not just outshot one SEAL.
She had outshot every single one of them, often by margins that defied statistical probability.
Commander Hayes approached her as she was packing her rifle, his stern expression replaced by something approaching awe. "Martinez," he said quietly, "that was the most impressive display of marksmanship I have ever witnessed."
"You have my apology, and you have my recommendation letter."
Around the range, the SEALs were approaching Sarah one by one, offering congratulations and expressing admiration that was clearly genuine. The mockery had been replaced by respect earned the hardest way possible. But the most meaningful moment came when Petty Officer Morrison, the same man who had called her Barbie 3 days earlier, stepped forward with his hand extended. "I owe you an apology, Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine regret.
"You're not a doll.
You're a damn warrior, and it would be an honor to serve alongside you." As Christmas Eve evening settled over the base, Sarah Martinez packed her equipment with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had proven a point that needed proving. She had come to Coronado carrying the weight of a lifetime of being underestimated, and she was leaving with the respect of the most elite warriors in the world. But, more than that, she was leaving with the knowledge that sometimes the most important battles are fought not against enemies, but against the assumptions and prejudices that tell people what they cannot accomplish. Christmas morning would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but, for now, Sarah Martinez could rest in the knowledge that she had given herself the best Christmas gift of all, the proof that she was exactly as good as she had always believed herself to be. Christmas morning arrived with a serenity that seemed almost impossible after the dramatic events of the previous day. Sarah woke to find a dozen handwritten notes slipped under her door, each one from a different SEAL offering everything from formal apologies to invitations to train together to requests for shooting tips. The most surprising note came from Commander Hayes himself. Written in the precise handwriting of a career military officer, it simply read, "Martinez, report to my office at 1000 hours. We need to talk." Hayes. Sarah dressed carefully in her cleanest uniform and made her way through a base that felt completely different than it had just 24 hours earlier. SEALs who had previously ignored her or made jokes at her expense now nodded respectfully as she passed. Some even stopped their conversations to offer congratulations on her performance. Commander Hayes' office was spartanly decorated, filled with commendations, photographs of his various deployments, and a wall dedicated to fallen comrades. He gestured for Sarah to take a seat across from his desk, then studied her with the same intensity he had shown 3 days earlier, though now it carried respect rather than skepticism. "Martinez," he began, leaning back in his chair, "in 28 years of military service, I have never seen shooting like what you displayed yesterday.
Never.
I've worked with military snipers, Olympic marksmen, and some of the most naturally gifted shooters in the world.
None of them could have done what you did."
Sarah maintained her military-bearing but allowed a small smile.
"Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," Hayes continued.
"Because what I'm about to offer you is going to change your life, and not necessarily in ways that will make you happy." He leaned forward, his expression growing serious. "The Pentagon has a special program, so classified that most generals don't even know it exists. It's called the Precision Weapons Initiative, and they're looking for shooters who can perform impossible shots under impossible conditions." Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her voice steady.
What kind of impossible conditions, sir?
The kind where a single shot from 2,000 meters away prevents a war. The kind where missing means American hostages die. The kind where the target is a terrorist leader surrounded by civilians and you have one chance to take him out without collateral damage. Hayes stood and moved to his window, looking out at the Pacific Ocean. They approached me 6 months ago, asking if I knew any shooters who could handle that level of pressure and precision. Until yesterday, I was going to tell them no such person existed. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of waves breaking on the shore.
Sarah understood that she was being offered something far beyond a simple assignment transfer.
This was an invitation into the most elite levels of military service, where operations were so sensitive they didn't officially exist.
Sir, she said carefully, what would accepting such a position mean for my current career path? Hayes turned back to face her. It would mean leaving the normal military structure behind completely.
New identity, new background, operations that you could never discuss with anyone including family members.
It would mean becoming a ghost.
He returned to his desk and pulled out a thick manila folder. But it would also mean working with the best of the best, having resources most soldiers can only dream of, and making the kind of difference that saves thousands of lives. Sarah stared at the folder, understanding that it represented a crossroads that would define the rest of her life. On one hand, she had already achieved more than she had ever dreamed possible. Her performance yesterday had proven that she belonged among the elite, and she could continue her military career with the respect and recognition she had always sought. On the other hand, this mysterious program represented the ultimate test of her abilities, a chance to use her extraordinary skills in ways that could impact world events.
How long do I have to decide? She asked. 72 hours, Hayes replied. After that, the offer disappears forever. Sarah spent the next 3 days in intensive discussions with program recruiters who had flown in from Washington.
The more she learned about the Precision Weapons Initiative, the more intrigued she became. This wasn't just about shooting, it was about becoming part of a team that operated in the shadows to prevent conflicts before they could escalate. She learned about previous missions where a single perfectly placed shot had prevented international incidents. She met with former program members who spoke in careful generalities about operations that had saved countless civilian lives. She reviewed training programs that would push her abilities even further than they had already been developed. But, perhaps most importantly, she thought about her father's words from years earlier, "Let your actions speak louder than their words ever could." On her final evening at the SEAL compound, Sarah was surprised to find Chief Petty Officer Thompson waiting for her outside her quarters. The grizzled veteran had become something of a mentor to her over the past few days, sharing stories of his own career and offering perspectives on military life that only came with decades of experience. "So," he said without preamble, "I hear you're considering something that would take you away from all this normal military stuff."
Sarah nodded, not surprised that word had gotten out despite the supposed secrecy of the program. "It's a big decision."
Thompson was quiet for a moment, looking up at the stars that were just becoming visible in the darkening sky. "You know, in my 26 years, I've seen a lot of talented people. Most of them were content to be the best in their unit, or their base, or their branch of service. They found their level and stayed there." He turned to look at her directly. "But, every once in a while, you meet someone who has the ability to redefine what's possible. Someone who can do things that make everyone else reconsider their own limitations." Sarah felt the weight of his words.
"And, you think I'm one of those people? Yesterday you made 49 of the world's most elite warriors look like amateurs."
"That's not talent, Martinez.
That's a calling." That night, Sarah made her decision.
She called her father from the secure phone in Commander Hayes' office, speaking in the careful code they had developed over years of military communications.
"Dad," she said when he answered, "remember when you taught me that pressure was just another word for opportunity?"
"I remember, sweetheart.
I think I'm about to find out just how much pressure I can handle." Thomas Martinez was quiet for a long moment.
Then, in a voice filled with pride and understanding, he said, "Show them what a Martinez can do, Sarah.
Show them what impossible looks like."
3 months later, Sarah Martinez officially died in a training accident that never actually happened. In her place emerged Rebecca Chen, a specialist in long-range reconnaissance whose background was so thoroughly documented and so completely fictional that even she sometimes had trouble remembering which parts were real. Her new assignment took her to places that didn't appear on any map, working with teams whose existence was known only to a handful of people in the highest levels of government. She operated in deserts where political tensions threatened to explode into full-scale wars, in mountains where terrorist leaders thought they were safe from retribution, in cities where a single shot could prevent catastrophes that would claim thousands of lives. But, regardless of the name she used or the identity she assumed, Rebecca Chen never forgot the lesson she had learned on Christmas Eve at a Navy SEAL compound in California. She never forgot that the most important battles are often fought not against visible enemies, but against the assumptions and limitations that others try to impose on you. Years later, when military historians would study the prevented conflicts and averted disasters of the early 21st century, they would note the unusual number of precision interventions that seemed to resolve dangerous situations through means that defied explanation. They would write academic papers about the mysterious effectiveness of certain classified operations, never knowing that many of those successes could be traced back to a tiny woman who had once been mocked as a doll. Sarah Martinez had wanted to prove that she belonged among the elite. Instead, she had proven that sometimes the most elite group is a group of one, standing alone with impossible skills and the courage to use them when the stakes could not be higher. The SEALs at Coronado still tell the story of Christmas Eve, though the details have grown more impressive with each retelling. They speak of the tiny woman who appeared out of nowhere and redefined what they thought was possible. Some of the younger SEALs think it's just a legend, a story told to remind them that assumptions can be dangerous. The veterans know better. They know that sometimes legends are born from moments when someone refuses to accept the limitations that others try to place on them. They know that the most dangerous person in any room might be the one everyone underestimates. Most importantly, they know that somewhere in the world, operating under a name they will never know, the woman they once called a doll is still proving that impossible is just another word for hasn't been done yet. And, on quiet Christmas Eves, when the wind is just right and the stars are perfectly clear, they remember the lesson she taught them about the difference between what people appear to be and what they actually are capable of achieving when given the chance to prove it.